Welcome, everyone, to AI Prompt Writing, Mastering the Art of the Ask for Transactional Practice. I'm Amanda Harris. I'm the co-chair of BHBA's AI in the Law section, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Ashley Jones. Ashley Jones is commercial counsel at LinkSquares, a contract management software company, where she focuses on contracts management, legal operations, and negotiation. She's admitted to the Connecticut bar and brings more than 5 years of experience in legal services to her practice. And now, let's get started.
Amazing. Thank you, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here with BHBA today and to dive into this topic with you. As Amanda mentioned, I'm commercial counsel at LinkSquares. And aside from working in-house for my transactional practice, I've also worked as outside counsel and now specifically in legal tech. The session today is going to be a legal workflow session for attorneys who understand that AI is here and want to use it better. What I'm hoping everyone gets out of today is some reusable and actionable structures, not just some theory floating around the room like glitter in a fan. So with that said, let's jump into the agenda. So first, we're going to start with our mindset, right? Why prompting matters and how to best use AI as an attorney, really, for our prompting and transactional practice. Then we're going to get into some prompt structures, and then we're going to get into some verification and what I call defensive prompting and the stress testing the AI, right? Then we'll land on some universal, repeatable frameworks that you're just going to be able to rip and run with as soon as you log off today. And I have budgeted time for a Q&A, but we have a lot of material to get to. So if I see a great question as I'm going through, I'll be sure to try to include it as we go along. But let's dive right into the material. Perfect. So one thing I really wanted to start off with was that AI is not here to replace attorneys. It's really here to reduce friction across repetitive, high volume, and communication heavy workflows. And the best users of AI are the ones who already have our general skill sets, right? As attorneys, we define problems clearly, we communicate precisely, we do understand business objectives, we're good at identifying constraints and structuring instructions effectively. Because at the core of prompting is strategic communication, which is a skill a lot of us have had to learn, perfect, or continuing to perfect. It's legal practice after all. And I think that's so important to bring into how we go about prompting. So, why does prompting matter? Prompting matters because, oh, next slide. Perfect. So prompting matters for multiple reasons. And some things I really wanted to highlight were delegation. Because a great analogy for this is giving a junior associate very vague instructions is inevitably going to lead to a very vague work product. And AI responds to ambiguity in the same way. So really think about how clarity is going to drive quality and consistency when you're delegating tasks and tasks to your AI tool. Next, communication design. The same model can produce dramatically different outputs depending on the information it's given within the prompt. So whether that be the role, context, audience, constraints, or even the format of the prompt generally, can really change and alter the output that you're going to receive. And lastly, workflow architecture. Having repeatable prompt structures can act as mini protocols for contract review, deal summaries, fallback language, and maybe even some escalation memos or escalation talk tracks. And having this kind of structural workflow is going to really improve efficiency and reduce some of that friction that we were mentioning before. After all three of these points really lead to effective prompting still being attorney supervision. You're shaping the work and then going to evaluate the result. So, if prompting is attorney supervision through strategic communication, the question then becomes, where do you start? And the answer is always the problem, not the prompt. So let's talk about what that actually means. Perfect. So I've been doing a lot of reading and research and trying to understand some different principles that apply to AI use and prompting generally. And I've been reading the book titled Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, who's a philosopher in Stoicism. And a quote that really stood out to me was that everything was to be approached logically and with due consideration in a calm and orderly fashion, but decisively and with no loose ends. And I couldn't help but draw a line from that Stoic principle to prompting discipline itself. When we're starting with the problem, we're clarifying the problem, we're imposing that order, right? We're acting decisively, and we're avoiding loose ends in the output by asking ourselves these four questions before we start the prompt. What is the problem? So we're defining the legal or business objective. Who's the audience? Again, this will dramatically change the output. Are we talking to an executive, opposing counsel? Who's reviewing the output and what do they need from it? And what does good look like? This one I can't stress enough because I feel like sometimes we'll jump into a tool and we'll start with a prompt without actually acknowledging or defining what a good output form would be for us. So understanding and deciding whether that's a memo, table, document, bullet points, plain English summary, it's going to help you really be able to verify and validate that the output you're getting is the output you wanted. And then lastly, what are the constraints? And this is really where our legal cap comes in play, right? Are we talking about jurisdiction, different risk tolerances, specific guidelines from the business or your client, and format, length, and tone also dramatically will change the output and are good to keep in mind as well as constraints. So where does AI actually really sit inside the workflow now that we understand where we've got to start? So I love this visual because it really highlights the fact that the attorney sits at the top, the beginning, and at the end of the workflow by defining the problem and applying the legal judgment before any sort of business reliance. And the AI output sits as the middle stage accelerator. Yeah, it can generate, organize, and surface patterns, but it cannot be the owner of the advice, the judgment, or the business decision. And this is that where we're thinking about using AI as cognitive offloading versus cognitive surrender. What can we offload to leverage that acceleration boost? We're not surrendering our judgment here. We're just reducing the friction. Great. So let's talk about some common prompting mistakes. And before I jump into the six of these, you'll see that they kind of directly relate to some of the things we've already talked about. What I do want to highlight is that these mistakes are not moral failures. They kind of just act as predictable signs that the user is starting with the tool instead of the problem. So when we're looking at leveraging AI for prompting, we want to make sure we're, of course, defining that business objective, not using vague instructions. Review this contract gives the AI far too much to work with and gives us far too little control of the output. Failing to identify the audience. We've already gone over how that can dramatically change our output. Mistake number four. This one, I think, is the most important risk for legal work, over trusting AI output. Because AI is really good at producing plausible language, but in doing so, sometimes it can hide unsupported analysis. So it's really important that we challenge the AI output and really ensure we're reviewing it with a critical eye. Again, ignoring constraints and risk tolerance, bringing our legal mindset and what we know about the combination of legal and business is going to really improve our prompting skills and our prompting outputs, right? Mistake number six, I've been guilty of this one, and it's trying to build the perfect prompt immediately. Because the perfect prompt really doesn't exist in the abstract, right? It's just about making sure that we're building the prompt that's going to help us solve and address the problem that is right in front of us. I'm really hoping that in the rest of this session, we are going to give you some tools to avoid these mistakes without requiring anyone in this room to become a technologist. Guarantee that. So now that we know what to avoid, let's talk about how we can use AI more intentionally. And I think there's really two modes here of prompting. First is offensive prompting. And I think of this as acceleration. It's getting tasks done. We're drafting, summarizing, brainstorming, structuring workflows, and translating legal risks into business language, or maybe even some lay terms, depending on who your client is. Then there's defensive prompting, which is validation. We're challenging AI assumptions. We're requiring support from our AI tool. We're testing alternatives, identifying hallucinations, and confirming everything in our output before attorney judgment and before that business reliance. As attorneys, we're already stress testing contracts, clauses, arguments, and business positions. And defensive prompting is applying that same instinct to AI output. And one thing that I think is really great about AI is, unlike humans, AI has no ego in being corrected. Sometimes it actually gets excited when you point out its failings. Great job at catching this. Oh, way to go. You're so right. Exclamation point. So let's leverage that to our advantage to use it to pressure test itself, even pressure test us before the deal or the situation pressure tests you. In section 3, we'll return to defensive prompting in more detail and some pointers there. Perfect. Now, before we get into some of the specific prompt structures that I mentioned in the agenda, I wanted to highlight what I think of as the prompt ingredient shelf that we'll be pulling from. Not every prompt is going to need every variable that you see, but strong prompts intentionally choose the right ones, whether that's objective, the audience, role, tone, source material. And two that I want to specifically highlight as being legal specific variables are going to be your constraints and your risk tolerance. These are two tools where our legal minds are and our skill set can really work to transform output from generic to usable and actionable. And once we understand these components, we'll be able to build our own prompts and confidently without relying solely on copy and paste methodology. Perfect. So we're going to go over 9 offensive, which would be those accelerating prompt types for transactional practice. And these are going to move from simple to more sophisticated while still remaining practical for transactional work. We're going to move from what is to which prompt fits the structure of the problem best. So let's start off with our zero-shot prompt. It's the simplest prompt type. No examples, just a direct ask. When I say simple, I don't want us to confuse that with sloppy, because the formula itself still needs a task, context, and a desired output. This is going to be best for your straightforward drafting tasks, document summaries, quick issue spotting, and even just some acceleration on really familiar document types and requests. So let's take a look at what this formula looks like in a prompt example. All right, here we go. So every prompt example that we go over is going to follow this same kind of structure with the formula key and the color coding, so that when you look at this resource later on, you can see and understand where some of the prompt ingredients fit in that we've talked about. So for this zero-shot prompt example, we're going to give the task, which is review the attached NDA from the perspective of customer side counsel and summarize the top 5 legal and operational risks in bullet format. You'll notice here that I do have some output instruction embedded in the task. That's totally fine, and sometimes that's really just the cleaner, clearer way to start off. Customer side counsel, that part matters within the task because it orients the risk before the AI begins analyzing and it gives some more context into the role that we're playing, right? Then we're moving into context, which is flag provisions involving the data handling, non-standard confidentiality, unilateral termination, and remedy limitations. This takes it from the AI simply summarizing to now looking for deal relevant issues. And then we're building upon that by in our output and constraint instruction, which is do not invent provisions not present in the document. This is kind of layering on that defensive prompting methodology that we were talking about. And it's a simple but powerful legal guardrail, and it's going to ensure that we're staying within the four corners of the document that we've provided. We're not wandering off into la la land, and we're actively preventing hallucinations and some assumptions in our first prompt go around. Now, I do have another example here for you. So this one, the task, summarize this agreement for a business executive in plain English. You can see here within the task itself, we've included our audience, which is the business executive, which is going to alter the output to ensure we're speaking the language a business executive would want to see, right? And then we're giving some context, which is to focus on commercial obligations, key risks, and renewal terms. We're giving the AI something to work with in terms of what we know our business executive is going to care about. Helps us understand what are some things we need to flag right out of the gate before we dive into some more of the nuts and bolts of the agreement itself in our regular review. And the constraint here in the output, we're limiting it to 250 words. This length limit creates usable work product and forces the AI to prioritize what it's going to include in its output and what it's going to deem really worthy of including in the output. It's giving it some more guardrails, and let's be honest, it's preventing it from giving us a memo we won't want to read or won't have the time to. We're thinking about acceleration and time efficiency management, right? Okay, now we're done with zero shot. Let's move to one-shot prompting. So with one-shot prompting, you're giving the AI one example to teach maybe format, style, or some kind of analytical pattern that it can replicate without getting too detail-oriented in specific instructions. We already understand the power of a good form, template, or prior work product. Let's face it, we love precedent, and so does AI. So we're applying that same sentiment of precedence to the one-shot prompt. Now our formula here is the instruction, single example, and the new task. The example you provide doesn't have to be perfect, but it should reflect the structure or information you want repeated in the output. So let's take a look at the example. Perfect. So we've got our instruction, review the attached SaaS agreement in our standard summary, deal summary format below. Clear, straightforward. Then we're going to get into the example format. Here I've put in some bullet point formats, but you can absolutely just copy and paste a deal summary, for example, and put it in here. You don't have to explain it, but I did it this way for the purposes of the CLA, not to get too bogged down on my ideal deal summary. And then I've gone into the new task, which is now use the same structure, apply it to and summarize the attached SaaS agreement. And I added in another constraint. I do this in a few prompts just to help introduce that idea of defensive prompting. And that is do not add categories not present in the example. Again, this is to keep the AI from going down avenues, rabbit holes, and flagging things that aren't exactly what I'm trying to look for. It's definitely okay to admit that if you do want some things surfaced that not included here, but I did just want to provide the example and context as to why this would be helpful. Great. We established a pattern here, so what's next? It's a few shot prompt. And this is where we're providing multiple examples to ensure that AI can infer a stronger pattern through the examples that we're providing. This type of prompt is where teams are kind of going to be able to encode some institutional knowledge to the prompt and to the AI, whether that's going to be related to risk levels, risk workflows, and it creates some consistency across the attorney teams and some reduction of output variability, and really puts the power and control more in our hands in terms of deeming what's acceptable and unacceptable before we hit enter on shipping our prompt to our tool. So let's take a look at an example. So this one for our formula, like the other ones, we've got instruction, then we've got our examples and the new task. Here I'm asking it to review the limitation of liability clause examples from prior agreements and to draft 3 fallback positions that I can include in the playbook. For my examples, I have listed one where I've kind of described the example, but again, here you can quite literally copy and paste the full clauses from prior agreements and ship that out. It doesn't have to be described. Then I go into the new task, which is to draft the 3 positions. And I'm giving some constraints here too. I want position 1 to be most favorable. I want position 2 to be commercially reasonable compromise, and position 3 to be our minimal acceptable position. And then for each one, I want the AI to explain what we gain and what we concede. This instruction is what converts the language drafting into legal strategy and gives me some insight into how it came to the conclusion it came to, right? And this can be leveraged as a starting point for building a playbook. It can also be leveraged as a gut check for what you're doing. I love that question, Barbara, and I will type an answer or I'll get to that later, but great question. Um, so now let's look at what happens when we add even more structure to these instructions. And that's how we get to instructional prompting. It's where we're giving a step-by-step task list with explicit output requirements. So these instructions are going to create control, right? What to review, how to categorize, and how to present the result. And I think this is a great way to prompt. And it also reminds me, going back to the Marcus Aurelius quote I shared, it's giving the AI that calm and orderly fashion discipline and instructing how to apply that to the legal workflow. So our formula here is going to be task, specific instructions, and output requirements. And let's jump into our example. Oh, actually, we'll talk about what a weak prompt looks like in a strong prompt, and then we'll go into a more detailed example. So a weak prompt, and I'm sure this is one we've all tried and tested and probably gotten really frustrated with the output we received, and that's review this contract. So what's missing? There's no perspective, there's no role, no output requirements, no risk areas, no guardrails whatsoever, just a really open-ended ask, kind of giving the AI free rein to take it down whatever path it wants to. So how do we make it stronger? So let's look at the second example. Review this MSA from the perspective of customer side legal counsel. Given it a task and we've given it the perspective and the role, right, that it should be taking into consideration. And we're then saying identify unusual liability, data privacy, and termination provisions. We're giving it specific things to look for and then present the findings in a table. We're taking it to a more actionable place in terms of what we want the output to look like and what's going to work best for us. And this is a great way to emphasize the stronger prompt is not longer just for the sake of length, right? It's better supervision. All right, now let's take a look at an example. Great. So we're starting with our task, which is review the attached commercial agreement and complete the following. Then we're giving it instructions. Identify provisions that materially deviate from market standard, flag the auto renewal, unilateral indemnities, liability, some things around data transfer, restrictive IP ownership, categorize each as legal, operational, financial, and reputational. And then lastly, recommend fallback language where deviation is material. Then we are giving our output requirements, was present the findings in a table, and then giving our table categories of the clause, issue, risk level, business impact, suggested revision. And then one last constraint. If a category does not apply, state none identified. This constraint here will prevent silent omissions and creates a more complete review record. I think using these types of prompts is great for building playbooks, surfacing a lot of different types of risks or a lot of issues in one go, even maybe validating what you've already found in your review as a gut check, right? These prompts are super great for that, and you can really pack in a lot or a little within in terms of the actual instructions that you're going to be giving it. Okay, now we're going to move to role-based prompting. And this is when you're going to be assigning a role to the AI to take on a specific persona or perspective, or even calibrating for a specific audience. And because the perspective changes analysis, a vendor side counsel and a customer side counsel are not going to be prioritizing the same risks, and a CFO and a CEO likely are not going to want to see the same analysis or details or even be looking for the same things. So in the formula, I've got role, task, audience, and desired output. And again, because there are two ways of doing role-based prompting, not everyone is going to include role and audience. You might just have role, or you might just have audience involved. Or you can go crazy like I did here and include both. So let's take a look at an example. Perfect. So here I am including role and audience just for the sake of giving the most complete example I can here. And so the role is act as senior in-house counsel of a mid-market SaaS company. Then we've got the task, which is review the attached vendor agreement and explain key financial risks, operational concerns, and implementation friction, renewal and auto-renewal obligations, termination exposure, and exit costs. Peter, to answer your question, the examples I am presenting today are AI provider agnostic. So you could try these in any AI system that is, of course, approved, legally vetted, and approved by your data security team. Then I've got audience, which is using the above explanations, prepare a briefing for the CFO. Assume your audience understands business risks, but not legal advice. Because again, your CFO is not going to need every single piece of legal doctrine or even really legal doctrine, right? It's going to need the information it needs to make a decision relative to the risk that's present. Then I've added for my output, use plain English and limit the response to 300 words or less. Again, this word cap forces prioritization and prevents the output from becoming a memo that no one's going to want to read or weed through. Perfect. So now let's go to contextual prompting. Contextual prompting is telling the AI where it is in the room. The role is telling the AI who it is, and the contextual is just taking a level further and just giving it all that background information that we know. We're front loading the prompt with deal dynamics, and the deal environment that it cannot otherwise know, right? Whether it's timing pressure, stakeholder goals, risk tolerance, relationship dynamics, maybe even escalation requirements. Because we're moving from it being less about the document alone and more about the ecosystem around the document. So our formula is context, task, any constraints that may be present that can also be included in your context, and your desired output. So let's take a look at an example. This one is really beefy, so I'm going to try to walk through this one a little bit slower to really highlight where this is going to really be about deal strategy, right? So the context. We're giving it a role. We're counsel to a software provider, and we're negotiating an MSA with a large, and I've given the actual ARR to support what large means. Business context. Sales wants to close the deal this quarter. Customers focused on data privacy, indemnification, and liability. Our client has moderate risk tolerance. The standard position is a 12-month liability cap. We can make some commercially reasonable compromise, but should not accept uncapped liability except where expressly approved. Now the task. Review the attached customer red lines and identify most likely to delay signature or materially increase legal, financial, or operational risk. You see, we've added some constraints there, some definite items it's going to have to check and look for specifically. And for each issue, provide the provision or issue area. We want to always be able to tie this back to the language within the contract or the red lines, the commercial impact, and the suggested fallback position. Then we're going to add in some constraints. Do not recommend below our client stated risk tolerance, because we've already said we can't do the uncapped. Our standard is 12-month, and we've got a moderate risk tolerance. And we want it to separate legal risk from business judgment because as attorneys, our role is to advise, but ultimately the businesses make the decisions, right? And we want to know where those two intermingle and confirm the intermingling, right? But let's keep them separate because we can put them together and puzzle them together because that's our role. And then for the output, I want it to priority order, critical, moderate, and minor. And this means you're seeing the most critical items first from the AI output. And that's really helpful, especially if this is what you're running as soon as you get the red lines, for instance. It helps us know where we need to prioritize and maybe where we need to get ahead of things and have some conversations internally about where things land. And if you get a list back that's like 50 critical items, this is something I also leverage to budget time for my day. Because sometimes you have 3 hours to dive into, right, into an agreement and stay dedicated. Sometimes it's this just came in. I've got 30 minutes before my next meeting. How far can I get through here? And should I be flagging anything to someone before I hop into this meeting, right? It's about deal and workflow strategy. And it's that, again, cognitive offloading where we're leveraging the AI to help organize red lines, options, but we ultimately still hold the decision making as to what actually fits the deal itself. Okay, so now we can move to meta and system prompting, which is really setting the standing rules for the session that you're going into with your AI tool. And one thing I think is really great about meta and system prompting is depending on the tool that you're leveraging, right? You may be able to impart these on the back end. So you're not having to start a prompting session with them. It's just going to be the standing rules that your team leverages. I'm sorry, that your team will be forced to leverage because they're embedded within the tool. We're setting behavioral rules, constraints, maybe even some workflow expectations. And in our formula, we've got behavioral rules, tasks, restrictions, output requirements. You don't need all of these, right? You might just have some behavior rules. You might just have some restrictions or a task that needs to be performed every time you put in a prompt, or just output requirements for the entire session that you're jumping into. So let's take a look at an example. Great. So for here, I have included behavioral rules, restrictions, and output requirements. So not everything that was in that initial formula, because not everyone, like I said, is going to need that. So for my behavioral rules, I'm letting it know it's my legal drafting and review partner. And the role is transactional counsel reviewing commercial agreements, standing rules, separate factual observations from recommendations, flag provisions requiring jurisdiction-specific review, and keep edits minimal unless I ask for a full redraft. Then I'm moving into restrictions. Do not fabricate citations or contract provisions. I'm forcing the AI to stay within the four walls of what I've provided. Then, if I ask, is this okay? Walk through the risk before giving me a yes or no. That lets the AI know that I need everything it gives me to be supported. I don't need blind yeses or nos. And you can change the is this okay to kind of any question. But it's about framing how you want the output and that you're instilling within the AI that you need more from it than just blanket one word or one word answers, really. Perfect. So we can move to chain of thought prompting. And this is forcing your AI to show its work pretty much. Instructing it to reason through the problem step by step before reaching a conclusion and to show you its reasoning. I think this is a great one to start off with, especially if you're leveraging a new tool. So you can kind of better understand how it thinks and how it goes about its reasoning to see how much meta or system prompting you'll need to do, or maybe how much contextual prompting you'll need to do. Like how much are you going to need to give it in order to ensure what you're getting is sufficient. And so the formula is kind of just giving it some steps to work through, and then the conclusion to the ultimate problem or question at hand that's being posed to it. It helps in surfacing some assumptions that just receiving a bare conclusion might hide. And that's part of us really ensuring that we are reviewing AI outputs for any risk that may be involved, generally with using AI, and kind of leveraging this as a defensive prompting tool. So let's take a look at the example. Perfect. So I am in my first step, I'm giving some context here. Walk me through the risk of the following clause step by step before giving me your conclusion. I'm going to paste the clause in there. Now, I've added these other three items, which totally optional, but I just wanted to show how you could take this even a little bit further. So I'm giving some deal context and giving it my initial concerns and my perspective, ensuring that it knows that I'm either the buyer or the seller or the licensor, etc. And then step two, walk through your reasoning. And then step three, which is going to be that conclusion, then give me a risk assessment and a recommended action. It's forcing the AI to give you all of the steps to show its work, and it's giving you what you need to follow along with where it was going through the reasoning. Because if you do this and you're sound and you're following with the reasoning it's giving you, but the conclusion's just like coming out of left field and has nothing to do with it, that it's likely a tool problem, and you can provide it some constructive feedback or corrective action. But it's ensuring we're not just looking for conclusions. We're looking for something that we can track, follow, stand behind, and validate every step of the way. Great. So iterative refinement. And really think that this is probably the type of prompting that we're all doing probably on an everyday basis because it's really intuitive to do. But what I love about this slide and by giving it a name, we're making sure we're making this behavior intentional because we're treating the AI interaction as a collaborative drafting process and not just a one-time query. So it's about the back and forth, starting with an initial prompt, providing some feedback, doing the refinement, and kind of repeating that process. Because it's a lot of what we do in our own actual practice, which is when we review complex contracts, complex deal summaries, it's not always going to be perfect on the first pass, right? We're going to be working, reworking, going back and forth. And it's taking that same kind of thought process and approach and applying it to prompting itself. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So for prompt one, I've included a lot here. This doesn't have to all be included, but I wanted to, again, show you something that's really loaded. So we're refining a deal summary together and we're outlining how this is going to look. Like I'm going to share the draft, you'll give feedback and a revised version, and then we'll keep refining. Then we've included the audience and the style of the deal summary that we're looking for. Um, so you can really start with, you can just stop at the we are refining a deal summary and then go to the audience and style because I think that those are two contextual points that are really helpful. You don't have to do the one, two, three if that feels like overload for you. So then we submit that, we get something back. We'll provide some feedback, reduce the legal jargon, focus more heavily on operational risk and financial exposure. We get something back. Well, I like it, but this is too long. Let's rewrite it in 5 concise bullet points, each bullet one sentence, and lead with the most material risk. And then take it from there. You can go back and forth continuing to refine, or you can refine further on your own once you got something that has helped improve your efficiency and accelerate things faster along the line. Whew. All right. So take a breath here. We've done a lot of work in talking about offensive prompts and some different prompt frameworks that we can use. And now we're going to shift and discuss how we're going to validate them. Because again, as we mentioned in our last kind of workflow image, that the business reliance should only come after our review. And now we're introducing maybe some challenge prompts and, of course, validation. So we're going to talk about now some defensive prompting. And before we jump in, I want to be clear, defensive prompting is not anti-AI at all. It's just responsible AI use for legal work, and it's going to help us know what we're watching out for. So let's take a look at what AI can get wrong. Yeah, and I honestly, I do feel like AI can get the laundry syndrome. This is a great question. Sorry, guys. Little sidetrack. The question was, do you ever find that AI has laundry syndrome? As you ask for refinements, it drops or more commonly omits to update items from before. And it still seems to have the problem that the more you ask for changes or refinements, the worse the overall output gets. It's getting better but yeah. So I have found that to be the case, and some of that is prompt driven, right? Some of that we can kind of track back to how we have prompted and what we've asked for. Because I do find that if I ask for a refinement, it is helpful to say, do not change this or leave everything else the same. Because AI, to some extent, is kind of like a hyperactive golden retriever and just wants to please and give you more and more. And without being sometimes specifically instructed to stop giving more or changes in certain places and only focus on one thing, it can try to rework everything it's done for you. So I do love to add a do not change this or refine to change this, but keep everything else the same. And I do think that I'm sure just in this hour, AI has changed a little bit dramatically as well. And I think as models are consistently improving, this is getting better. But I definitely have run into the laundry syndrome. So great question. Thank you. So let's talk about what AI can get wrong. AI can hallucinate. We have absolutely all heard of how it can create case law and the cases to support it. It can, invent things itself. AI can also overstate its confidence, which is, presenting some falsities with just some real unwarranted certainty. And then we've got misunderstanding context, which is some applying inapplicable frameworks where some context is missing. So if we're not saying this is vendor side counsel or customer side counsel, it can commingle the two or pick one and run with it. Or can create displacement risk. And so when we think about the examples and horror stories we've heard about the hallucination of cases and then the hallucination of the hallucinative cases, sorry, and actually providing some authoritative looking output and then attorneys blindly relying on it. These are all things that are risks in the tools. And I think as attorneys, we're great at mitigating these risks, and we'll talk about some defensive prompts that we can keep in our tool belt to challenge the AI. So we can jump to the next slide. And before I go over these prompts, I do want to bring up another quote from Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence, which if you haven't read it, highly recommend. It's a great way to think about how we combine our own intelligence with AI. But the quote was that LLMs can seem more impressive than they actually are. And that's because they are so good at producing answers that sound correct, at providing the illusion of understanding. And so these prompts are going to challenge that, right? To challenge that presumptive impressive nature. So our first one is assumption identification. What did the AI infer or assume based on missing context? This is specific for inference control. Then we've got our counter argument, and this is asking the AI to pressure test its own conclusion by surfacing the strongest opposing interpretation. And this, I think, you can also use to challenge your own analysis too, right? To pressure test yourself. Confidence check. This one's going to identify where the AI is uncertain because they can get some really confident answers or some, but this forces it to reevaluate and be honest and open with you as much as it can be without the actual EQ, right? Then we've got our hallucination check, which is going to force source support by tying each risk to the contractual language that we've provided, right? Then the escalation prompt. This one is great because some issues obviously need to be reviewed by counsel. So if you've got someone more junior, maybe even a paralegal, this is a great one to arm them with because it helps to identify when escalation is really needed, right? And I think this is great too because you can swap out the word attorney for finance, your CFO, your operations leader, things like that, to ensure where you may have missed something or where some further due diligence may be needed. So it's not just stress testing the AI, but you can use it to stress test yourself as well. And just a callback to something I said before about how the AI doesn't have an ego. So let's leverage that lack of ego And again, just ask it to challenge itself before we have the deal, the client, or the opposing counsel challenging us, right? Okay, now we're moving to the two universal prompt frameworks that I promised that you'll be able to just run with without having to memorize what few shot, one shot, three shot, four shot, five is. So let's jump into these two frameworks. The first one is called Craft, and this one's going to work best for like single document or discrete tasks like review this agreement, summarize this clause, draft this message, etc. Because it's asking for you're giving the AI the context, the role, audience, format, task. And this is just helpful to remember to avoid the vague, just review this style prompt. And then our next framework is scope. This one I'd say is better for like deal level strategy, negotiation, or workflows with competing constraints, right? So we're going situation, constraints, objective, persona, expected output. Again, craft is going to be faster for a single task, and scope is going to be better for strategic or some multi-variable work. Amazing. We've got through a lot today. So, as our key takeaways, I really want to stress that AI is a legal workflow amplifier, and it's not a replacement for legal judgment, and it's not a shortcut around it. It's just an accelerator to it. And the attorneys who's going to benefit the most are not the most technical in the room. It's the clearest thinkers, the most precise communicators, and the ones who understand that the quality of delegation shapes the quality of the output. The skills that make a great transactional attorney, defining the problem, identifying constraints, advising under uncertainty, translating risk into decisions, do not become less valuable in an AI-enabled environment. They become more valuable. So take the prompts, take the frameworks, and take the judgment you already have and go reduce some friction. Thank you so much. And thankfully, we have some time for questions. I know I've got two here. So let's get jumping in with those. So, which AI do you like to use for legal work and why? This one, um, I would say Claude has been my overall favorite of the more broadly available AI. It's more, in my opinion, more reliable and um, meets me where I'm at a little bit better and has more consistent outputs. So that's what I generally like to work with. Do I do personal consultations? I wouldn't call it a consultation, but if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to grab a coffee and chat further about this topic with you, because we can always learn from each other and learn together. Um, oh, thank you. Thank you so much for these compliments. I appreciate it. I'm so passionate about this topic. So I hope that came through and I hope you all learned something or maybe even just like felt validated in things that you're already doing. Yeah, absolutely. Please do request me on LinkedIn. I believe it's Ashley Jones ESQ. But you'll see my face and my red hair, so not hard to miss. All right, let's see what else we've got here.
Hey, Ash, it looks like we have one question
Okay.
within our help desk. Let's see, reading it. You recommend requiring citations to support contract language as a hallucination check. Have you found that current models reliably cite the correct language, or do those citations themselves require substantial verification?
I would always say as my rule of thumb to verify the citations as well. I find more times than not, it will be correct, but it's definitely that additional layer of validation that I strongly suggest that we do. Um, Even if it's asking for the exact line number from the contract, a snippet of it, a link to where it's getting the information so that you can just go in and validate that this was there. So definitely always do that cross check. Highly recommend that. Oh, thank you guys so much. And Charles, yes, I believe, yeah, this has been recorded and I'm pretty sure will be up on the website. Um, yeah, David, that's a great question. To whether or not asking AI, whether it's inserted or made up any case sites, absolutely. I love going in with a direct ask like that, gives the AI know where to hide, right? It's making it's the direct ask, direct answer. Yeah, let me actually pull up and I can drop my LinkedIn profile in the chat. Let me grab that for you. Um, Back here. Where did the chat go? Okay. Oh, that actually, maybe I drop it in. I think I dropped it into the chat. If not, I'm gonna send it to our lovely BHBA host to hopefully they can share it out broader. Um, uh, Amanda, do you see, or Suzanne, do you see the, okay, yeah, I did drop it in the, okay, great. When I answered it in the Q&A, it just disappeared from my view, so I wasn't sure where it went. Um, so I
Yeah,
did drop it there.
going to also drop it in the chat as well. We'll make a little, okay, here we go.
Great. Can you recommend any AI courses that would best benefit attorneys? Do you have particular favorites? University, Coursera AI, Harvard or specific AI company courses? Um, I think Google has done a really great job at putting out AI course content. They actually have a PDF resource that is specific to prompting, and it goes over it from like the more theoretical space, but gives some examples and helps you understand how the prompting frameworks they talk about directly relate to LLM capabilities in a way that I feel like isn't pretentious and is easier to understand. So definitely recommend Google's documentation. And there are a couple I've done from Course RA that if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I can give you the exact um, course titles because I'm blanking on them right now.
All right, Ashley, it looks like that's it for questions today. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, and thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully I see you soon.